And now I'm pleased to introduce our next guest, Jim Edgar. Jim Edgar was elected the 38th governor of Illinois in 1990, and he was reelected 4 years later by the widest plurality that any incumbent Illinois governor has ever received. He carried 101 out of the state's 102 counties. His long career in public service includes serving as a member of the Illinois General Assembly and as Secretary of State. After retiring from elective office, Governor Edgar was a resident fellow with the John F. Kennedy School of Government at Harvard. He now serves as a distinguished fellow at the University of Illinois Institute of Government and Public Affairs, where he leads the Edgar Fellows Program, which is an effort to bring together emerging leaders to address the state's major challenges across regional, partisan, and ethnic lines. Welcome, Governor Edgar, and thanks for joining us.
Nice to be with you.
And I want to pick up on your experience with the Edgar Fellows Program, which has been widely recognized as a stellar way to bring along young leaders and connect folks across party lines. And one of the people that you became familiar with in that program is Richard Irvin, who of course is now the mayor of Aurora, who's now running for the Republican gubernatorial primary in Illinois. And could you share us a little bit about what you know about Richard Irvin, how you got to know him, and your perspective on him entering this race?
Well, we've had a lot of very distinguished, excuse me, I've got an echo here. Technology is my challenge in life.
You're not the only one.
Let me throw my phone away so it doesn't. We've had a lot of very bright young people. Lieutenant Governor was an Edgar Fellow. The Speaker of the House was an Edgar Fellow. The list kind of goes on. Mayor Irvin, I was very impressed with him. I have to say, I was a little surprised when he became a Republican candidate because I always perceived he was a Democrat, but so was Ronald Reagan, and he became a Republican. So people do switch, but he impressed me of being a very knowledgeable, and I always judge people a little bit on their personalities. I think that's important. He had a very, I thought, agreeable personality. So the fact that he's mayor of the second largest city in the state of Illinois, I thought that also impressed me, that here is an African-American who could achieve that. So again, his time at the Edgar Fellow, and we had him back on one of the panels later, I was very impressed with him.
But you said that you were under the impression that he was a Democrat. Why was that, and how does that play into? I'm sure you know all about the debate that's been around his candidacy, that particularly coming from the Democratic Party side, that he's not really a true Republican.
Well, again, we've had people switch parties. Ronald Reagan's the best example. He switched parties right before he ran for governor, California. So I don't think that's a detriment. I don't think that disqualifies somebody, but I do think he'll be under more scrutiny probably in his primary about maybe some of the statements he made before and what is his positions today. But again, I don't think there's anything wrong with people switching parties, but I think it's important to be transparent. And so everyone kind of knows where that person is on the issues. And I'm sure we'll see that during the primary. And if he's fortunate enough to be the nominee in the general election as well.
So one of the other big issues big criticisms that he's getting, again, not just from the Democrats, but primarily from the Democrats, is where his backing is coming from. Specifically, Ken Griffin, the billionaire, the richest man in Illinois, who is just this week announced that he's putting $20 million into that campaign, and many people expect more to come. And the criticism that that he's not going to be his own man, that kind of money is going to buy a lot of influence, and that might be a problem for Irvin in the campaign.
Well, I think it's going to be an issue, and I think it could be a detriment to him. Though I have to say, and unfortunately, elections have got way too expensive. You almost have to be a billionaire to run, or you have to have a billionaire behind you. We've seen that in the last two cycles. We've seen two candidates for governor basically buy the primary, and both Bruce Rauner and J.B. Pritzker. They spent an inordinate amount of money in the primary, and that made a huge difference in why I think they got the nomination. Now, that doesn't mean you'll be a bad governor. It doesn't mean that that's wrong, but I think it's unfortunate we are at that where money plays such a large role. And in this case, while The mayor doesn't have the money. He has somebody behind him that has more money than anybody else in the state of Illinois, it appears from the list I've seen. And, that is unfortunate. We're in that situation, and that will be an issue he's going to have to defend, I think, throughout the campaign. Now, saying that, I would much rather have $20 million going into this primary than I would $1 million going into this primary.
Right.
Now,
So let me just, and first of all, Governor, it's great to see you. It's been a while. Thanks for joining us.
About 32 years since you've questioned me in a format like this. I was thinking you were about 12 at the time.
Oh, there you go. You cleaned that one up, Governor.
Okay. So here we are together today. But look, there is a difference. Rauner was spending his own money. Pritzker is spending his own money. What you have here, in a sense, do you think that there's a sense that if Ken Griffin doesn't like how the state is run, instead of fronting the money for a candidate he likes, he just shouldn't run himself? I mean, what's going on here when it's not, and I want to make the point, this is different than the battle of the billionaires.
It is different, but the fact that money plays, I mean,
that we
money
know.
makes a huge difference, and this kind of money will make a huge difference.
Right. So
I don't think a person has to run to try to have his point of view heard. I mean, that's, people contribute in many cases because they have certain views and they think that candidate might reflect those views, or they want to influence those candidates. So this isn't anything new. What is new? The amount. I mean, these are exorbitant amount of money.
And it is mind-blowing. Your analysis, please, of the Republican primary. We have 5 rivals in it. Could you start with Darren Bailey, the state senator? My analysis is he seems to have been solidified a hold on the Trump wing of the Republican Party, which is getting stronger. I think your analysis, and then let's go through the other.
I think that's accurate from what I don't know if I can identify all the Trump wing, but I think he is the one that is the most visible. And I think he'll get much of their support. But we'll have to see how this unfolds. I mean, this is again, with this kind of money floating around, it can change the dynamics. I don't know how this is going to play out. I never thought Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee for president back in 2016. So I'm not sure how good I am.
You're right, but because right now, with only a plurality is needed to win the nomination, and it seems like you have so much of the Republican establishment, money-wise, they're talking with their money has gone to Irvin, following because Griffin didn't want to look like he was just the only guy giving. Bailey has that. What about Sullivan or Shrimp or Rabin? Where do they fit in the mix? Where can they find a lane that they could get into? That it seems that Irvin and Bailey seem to have the 2 stories to tell of where the Illinois Republican Party's at. What's left for the others?
Well, Sullivan, I think he has some money. He doesn't have the money that Irvin has. He has more money than what Bailey has. He also, I think, I think he's a pretty attractive candidate. When I had lunch with him and I was impressed, his wife is Hispanic, which I think, in a general election would be really a big asset. And even in a primary, you might be able to, Hispanics do vote in Republican primary. The other 2 candidates, I don't know if they've got enough going for them right now to get much coverage. I don't know, Rabin, I know Raymond or whatever. I know the other candidate, he was a senator, but they neither one seem to have as much visibility as the other 3. But the question is,
I forgot his name. Sorry.
Yeah, and you have also the downstate, upstate to some extent, because suburbia is not as enamored with Trump as downstate is, and by downstate, that's everything out of the Collier County area. So you got to wait and see how those suburban voters might go, whether they'll go with Irvin or maybe they might go with Sullivan if he gets enough visibility up there. I don't know. I think only time will tell. I don't know how the whole Irvin thing is going to play in a Republican primary. That's going to be a little bit of a tough sell, but you've got a lot of money there to sell it with.
Is the Illinois Republican Party at a crossroads right now with the Trump factor hovering over it?
Well, I think the Illinois Party has not been as far to the right as the National Republican Party has been. Now, it's more far to the right than it was in my day. There's no doubt about that. But I still, Illinois, there's a little more pragmatism in Republican voters in Illinois than I think in some other areas. Though I do think there's no doubt Trump has a huge following in downstate Illinois. I think his support or apparent support in a Republican primary probably plays well downstate. Now, it might hurt in the suburbs to some extent, but only time will tell. And whether he'll get involved and take sides in the gubernatorial race in Illinois, I don't know what he might do. I have a hard time figuring out what Donald Trump might ever do. But I will say, even though a lot of the party leaders might want to move on from Donald Trump, my sense is the rank and file of Republicans still are pretty much locked in with him.
So I wanted to ask about a particular issue that's really a hot topic right now, and that's the whole debate around masks, around the pandemic, around reopening. And as you know, there's been a lot of debate in Springfield. There's been a couple of incidents in the General Assembly the last couple of days where some Republican members of the Assembly have come onto the floor unmasked to try to make a point. It's a big issue, particularly downstate, particularly with many Trump supporters. Do you expect to see the issues swirling around the pandemic play a role in the primary?
I don't think as much as we might have thought a few months ago. I mean, if the virus continues to decrease, I think we're not going to be wearing masks. We're going to be going back more than normal. Now, if another strain comes out and sends us back, that could happen. That's the trouble with dealing with this virus. Nobody's been here before. We don't know. We're kind of learning as we go along. And so there's a lot of unknowns. But if the current trends continue that we see today, I think 49 states now are going to do away with their mask bans. I think by the time we get to the primary. And another thing to keep in mind about this primary that's unique, it's in June. It's not in the dead of winter in March. I think we're going to have a lot more participation in that primary. This is really the only game in town. I mean, there's a Secretary of State race on the Democratic side, but that's not going to get people as excited as a gubernatorial race. So I think there's going to be a lot more interest in what the status of COVID is by June. I don't think anybody can predict, but I do think as we look right now, I would suspect it will be less of an issue than it was if the primary was right now.
So what will be the issues?
The whole issue of mask, maybe not. Well, there'll still be people that think about it, but it's not going to be as much of an issue as it is today.
So it's hard to believe that if we didn't have COVID, we would be early voting would be happening right now for the usual March 17 Illinois primary, when which is hard to believe. Why do you think there'll be more participation in a June 28th primary than in a March 17 primary, Governor?
Because you're going to have, it's a lot better weather. I mean, I campaigned in March. It's terrible. Most people don't think they're watching basketball. They're into other things. I just think by the time we get to June, and we see that in other states, I think there'd be more interest in the election because November's not that far away. I think it's great. I tried to change the primary. And that's one of my successes of bringing Republicans and Democrats together in Springfield to oppose my attempt to have a June or August primary, because they love an early primary. That helps incumbents because nobody's paying attention in December when you file. And most people aren't paying all that much attention in March. So you get a smaller turnout, and I think the party regulars or the incumbents have an advantage. I think having it in the spring and having it in June, that's actually the summer, you're going to have more people paying attention. There's going to be more time to think about these issues, and the candidates get to know them. So I think it'll be a better primary, but that makes it even different than any primary we've had before. So that's going to make it harder to predict what might happen.
Do you think Republicans should, when asked, answer the question of, do you believe that Biden was the elected president of the United States? No, not the question. We know he's the president. And answer questions about what they think about the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol and the attempt.
I think those are legitimate things to ask. I mean, it just boggles my mind that anybody would think January 6th was anything than a civil disturbance of great magnitude. And there's no way to justify that. And the people that do, I think they must be living on another planet. And I think it's unfortunate the Republican Party, the National Committee, put out that statement they did a couple of weeks
Sure,
ago.
you're talking about.
I just think that is, I mean, that's not the Republican Party that I was been a member of. That's not a Republican Party that really concerned about law and order. And to me, that is a legitimate issue. And so, no, I just think that hurts the Republican Party in the long term. It may not hurt in a primary as much, but I think it's devastating in a general election.
Right, but
So
I just
what has
wanna
happened,
hear-
Governor, what has happened to your party that it has come to this? Clearly, you're a very highly respected former governor. You've got a voice that people listen to, at least particularly in Illinois. What's happened that the party has come to this?
Well, we've seen a swing. I mean, we began to see it. I'll use this example. When I ran for governor in 1990, that's 30 years ago, downstate Illinois was swing. It kind of went, it could go either way. Usually the way that went was the way that state went. Suburbs, very Republican, Chicago, very Democrat. That's all changed. Downstate is very, very Republican. And a lot of that is we had a lot of Democrats, I call them somewhat Southern Democrats, who lived in downstate Illinois, Southern Illinois in particular. They became Republicans. Started with Ronald Reagan, and with Donald Trump, it completely crossed over. In many ways, they were more conservative, those Democrats, than Republicans in downstate. So we now have them in the Republican Party. In the suburbs, particularly among younger voters and women voters, many of them who were Republicans before today might be independents, or they've switched to be Democrats. And so we've seen a change in who makes up the Republican Party in Illinois. And I think in long term, it's detrimental to the Republican Party, because studies I've seen shows the Republican Party, Trump people, are mainly white, non-college educated, older people. Well, they're older people. They're not going to be around long. Younger people, we're not picking up. And Hispanics, particularly, to me, that's been the battleground. And I don't think the Republicans have played that card very well. Now, when I ran for governor, I carried the Hispanic vote in Illinois. First time I ran, it was a tie. Second time I won it handily. George W. Bush won it in Texas. So I think that the Republicans, unfortunately, we've kind of narrowed our base. We need to go back to be a party of the big tent. And censoring two congressmen who, and definitely Liz Cheney is extremely conservative on most issues. She just questioned some of Trump's approaches, and I can understand that. That makes no sense to me. And to say what they said about the riot on the Capitol makes absolutely no, that to me was just terrible. But that's why we're driving people away from the Republicans Party, especially younger voters and voters that are going to be around for a while. So I worry about the future of the Republican Party in the nation, and I do worry about it in Illinois, though I still think in Illinois, we have not gone as far extreme as the party has nationally.
Well, you have a point, because the state party never censured Adam Kinzinger, though the national party did. And you are clear then in saying you think any Republican who's asked about election denialism or January 6th should not dodge that question?
I think it's a legitimate question. It's a major issue, particularly if you're talking about law and order in this campaign. I think a lot of Republicans, I think that's a legitimate issue. I think that's a good issue Republicans have going into November. But I think they're going to have to deal with that issue. I don't think they can dodge that, no.
And Governor Pritzker's biggest political vulnerability is?
There'll be people mad about the way he handled the pandemic. I think he did a pretty good job. I mean, I was a governor. I went through the greatest natural disaster the state ever had, the Great Flood in 93. That was child's play compared to dealing with this pandemic. And I got to say, he didn't get a lot of hope, a lot of help. None of the governors did from the White House the first months of that. You need to have help from the White House. I think that's changed. But I think there'll be people mad about that. There's no doubt he's more liberal, probably on some issues, and I think probably the state is. And he'll catch, but his party is more liberal too. That's the trouble the Democrats have. We have the Democrat problem long-term with the Trump wing. I think the Democrats have a real problem with the far left, the Bernie Sanders, and some way even farther left than Bernie Sanders. So Governor Pritzker has to deal with that, and I think that can be an issue. I think he's the favorite going into the race. An incumbent governor, unless they really mess up, and I don't think he's messed up really bad. There's some things that I disagree with, but they have an advantage. He's not going to lack money. We know that, and he'll spend it. Now, saying that, this should be a better Republican year. Nationally and in the state, I think the Republicans could do better, but that's going to be influence how the top of the ticket goes. So it's important that the Republicans has a candidate at the top of the ticket who is not going to scare part of the state and say, "Well, no way, we're going to vote for that guy or for the Republicans." And I think that's part of why some of the Republicans went out and put their money and tried to find somebody they thought might be more acceptable in the general election than some of the candidates already announced.
Will you be?
Do you expect to endorse in the governor's race in the primary? Governor?
I'm not planning at this point. No, it could change, but I don't. I don't plan. I mean, I have a feeling. Edgar Fellows, I kind of, I don't want to necessarily get involved against him, and we're going to have a lot of them cross in this campaign. Now that doesn't mean that there won't be a time. I thought earlier, if Kirk Dillard had been a candidate again, who I think would have been a good candidate, I would have endorsed him. He's my former chief of staff. Other than that, I don't think at this point I will take sides, but that could change as the campaign develops and issues come up and things are said and whatever.
Well, if you change your mind, please give us a call. We'd love to have you back to talk about it.
Okay.
Thank you very much for being with us, Governor Edgar, and we'll see you again soon.
Okay.